Good day, mates. FBONE here, and I cannot wait to recap the 2022 Australian Grand Prix with all of you here today. Before we get into today's show, though, I have a very quick question for you. How are you hearing my voice right now? Your answer to this question dictates what I ask kindly of you to do next to help me grow the Formula BONE F1 show. If you're watching the Formula BONE F1 show on YouTube right now, hello, you can see me waving at you. I'd be so thankful if you please like this video and subscribe to Formula BONE on YouTube right now to help me grow the Formula BONE F1 show. If you leave a comment too, by the way, I will respond to it unless it's like mean or something. If you're listening on Spotify, hello. You can also see me waving at you because I have early access to video podcasts on Spotify. Check that out if you haven't yet. I will give you a virtual hug if you would please rate the show 5 stars on Spotify to help me grow the Formula BONE F1 show. And finally, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, hello. I'm waving, but you can't see it. I will love you like Mick Schumacher loves Seb if you'd please rate and review the Formula BONE F1 show on Apple Podcasts to help me grow the show. Y'all's support means the world to me, and if you could please help me out here, I'd be eternally grateful. All right, enough with all that. Here we go. This is the Formula BONE F1 show. FBONE! Welcome back to the Formula BONE F1 show, the Formula One podcast whose official 2022 Australian Grand Prix driver of the day is Alex Albon, okay? It's Alex Albon, and it's not even close. I'm Jared Borslow, but you can call me FBONE. Thank you so much for joining me here. And away we go. Today's main topic, recapping the 2022 Australian Grand Prix. On my Australian Grand Preview podcast, the one right before this, I gave you 4 storylines to follow throughout the race weekend. Let's see how those shaped up. The first storyline was how will Albert Park's new DRS setup affect the race? This storyline focused on the big news that swept all of the F1 internet, that the 2022 Australian Grand Prix would be the first ever race with 4 DRS activation zones, and that it would also only have 2 DRS detection lines. Well, funny story, the Australian Grand Prix's 4 DRS zone experiment ended before it even began, as between FP2 and FP3, the race director sent a note to all teams that read, "For safety reasons, DRS zones will be reduced to 3 for the remainder of the event." The removal of a DRS activation zone on the second day of a 3-day race weekend after 2 sessions had already been completed was very controversial. Many teams were angry because the amount of DRS zones affects the balance that they choose for the car, and they had already done 2 practice sessions on a balance they might not want to run anymore now that there's 1 less DRS zone. Balance, by the way, is, in simple terms, the proportion of grip spread out between the front and rear tires, and changing it up on a driver who has not been driving on that balance all weekend can actually increase the chances of things like oversteer and understeer, which are things that you don't really want to experience when you're at a street circuit, where if you just oversteer or understeer one time over the course of 58 laps, it could mean the complete end of your race. So pretty crazy that they would just throw this DRS zone removal in there in between FP2 and FP3. I would have thought that they would have done it maybe like after FP1 or not at all. Wild that they let them, have the entire night to think about all of their practice sessions, and then before FP3 go, hey, guess what? Nope. Very wild. Now, my favorite moment of controversy that came from this decision is how teams experiencing porpoising were pissed about it, because the removal of this DRS zone actually would punish them. This is because when DRS is open, there is less porpoising due to there being less downforce pushing the floor of the car into the track, which is how the porpoising begins. Now, one team boss, stay with me here, okay? One team boss allegedly went so far as to claim that Fernando Alonso was the most vocal proponent of having only 3 DRS zones instead of 4, and that this was not just due to safety reasons, but also because it would benefit the Alpine cars, which are largely avoiding porpoising. And so he's saying, Fernando Alonso is saying take away 1 DRS zone because it'll benefit Alpine. If that is not the most F1 accusation I've ever heard, pretty funny. No idea if it's true. I feel like if Fernando was saying it's for safety, it probably was mostly for safety, but maybe it's for safety and also it helps us, but it is for safety. I don't know. I would like to actually hear Fernando's take on the whole ordeal. As far as my storyline to follow went, while this year's DRS setup didn't really affect the race any more than the 2019 Australian Grand Prix DRS setup did because they ended up being largely the same, the 2021 track renovations, on the other hand, that I mentioned in my preview podcast, certainly affected the race in a very big way. By some estimations, 34 overtakes went down on Sunday, which is up from 15 overtakes in the previous 2 Australian Grand Prix combined. So well done on the reno there, Aussies. You did succeed in making the Australian Grand Prix a more overtake-filled and exciting race. The next storyline was Pirelli chose an interesting tire compound selection for Albert Park. This storyline to follow had to do with Pirelli electing to skip a compound at Albert Park and go C2 hard, C3 medium, and C5 soft. And this interesting selection had a not so interesting result. Aside from the C5 softs being used by drivers in qualifying because they were by far the quickest, when it comes to the race, only one driver who finished the race used the C5 softs, and it was only for 1 lap. That was, of course, my driver of the day, Alex Albon, who did an unbelievable 57 laps on his starting C2 hard tires before pitting for C5 softs with 1 lap remaining. I'll talk more about Albon's day here in a minute. I think that if it had been included in the compound selection, there's a good chance that we would have seen the C4 softs more than the 1 lap we ended up seeing the C5 softs, as some drivers may have preferred to start on the C4 softs and then switch over to the C2 hards, knowing that the C2 hards are extremely durable and could get them to the end without those extra laps they'd be putting on them, sacrificing too much in terms of pace. But because the C5 softs are very soft, every driver who finished the race used a combination of the C2 and C3 tires and neglected the C5s, again, except for Alex Albon, my driver of the day. The most common strategy at the Australian Grand Prix was starting on the faster C3s and then switching over to the more durable C2s to complete the race once degradation had set in for them on their C3s. Now, every driver who finished in the top 10 executed the strategy I just mentioned of starting on the C3s and going to the C2s, except, again, Alex Albon, my hero. The next storyline was Red Bull are looking to jump up to second in the constructors in Australia. And they did not. Okay? They did not. In fact, they are now further out of second in the constructors than they were when they got to Albert Park because Max's car apparently has diarrhea and cannot stop pooping its pants. Speaking of smelly fluid, Max's DNF was preceded by him saying, quote, "I smell some weird fluid. Everything is bleeping itself." It is believed that a fuel leak is the issue that Max suffered. After Saudi Arabia, I thought Red Bull's mechanical issues were behind them, but alas, they are not. The rhetorical question, okay, that I am forced to ask all of you. I don't want to ask it, okay? Kind of hurts me to ask it, but I have to ask it. Is Checo going to finish ahead of Max in the World Drivers' Championship at the end of the year? I didn't want to ask it, okay? But I had to. Answer it yourself. And let me know what you think in the comments or DM me or tweet it at me. My final storyline to follow was the return of Sebastian Vettel to the grid and the return of Daniel Ricciardo to Australia. And oh man, these two returns could not have gone more differently. Like, really. The man who had the far, far better of the two returns was Daniel Ricciardo, as he took home his first points of the 2022 season in his home Grand Prix with a surprise P6. Then you have Sebastian Vettel. Sebastian Vettel spent almost as much time on a scooter as in a race car at Albert Park. By the way, Seb was given a fine of €5,000 for riding that scooter because F1 is apparently the no-fun league like the NFL. But anyways, Vettel had one of the most unfortunate race weekends I've ever seen, suffering a power failure in FP1, a crash in FP3, and then another crash in the race. The only good thing that happened to Seb all weekend came at the expense of his teammate Lance Stroll, with Stroll's crash in Q1, giving Aston Martin's engineers just enough time to fix Seb's car from his crash in FP3 so that he could actually do one Q1 lap. It was pretty exciting. We're like, oh my gosh, Seb is going to be able to do one lap. Can he put together one flying lap and make it into Q2? Nope. He could not because he is in an Aston Martin, and they are bad. Worst car on the grid, in my opinion. The Aston Martin, I feel so bad for Aston Martin fans, okay? And it pains me to say I will be talking later in the podcast about how bad I feel for you and just how bad your team is right now. Of course, I need to now check in with you all regarding how my pre-race weekend top 5 finishers prediction played out. And folks, it was not great. It was bad. My prediction was P1 Max, P2 Checo, P3 Leclerc, P4 Carlos, P5 George Russell. Of course, I only got P2 correct, and I've actually come up with a list of excuses why, from which you may select your favorite. The first excuse, they took away a DRS zone mid-weekend, which, totally messed with my prediction. The prediction completely was based on there being 4 DRS zones. Another excuse, Max's car pooped its pants. Didn't expect that one to happen. Carlos beached it. Didn't see that coming. McLaren have been sandbagging. I like this one a lot. Like, McLaren got P5, P6. I think they've been sandbagging. There's no way I could have predicted a Lando Norris P5 because, McLaren have been sandbagging. Very rude of them. Totally messed with my prediction. Now, 2 other excuses that I think you may enjoy. One of them is solar flares. The sun, it messes with gravity, and it caused my brain to make a mistake. And then finally, of course, for you astrology people, Mercury's not in retrograde, which obviously it's going to mess my picks up. Actually, last but not least, there's one you really might enjoy, and that's that I suck at these predictions. Okay? I did get P1, P2, and P3 for Saudi Arabia right. Gave me a little bit of I thought I had the hot hand. I got a little bit overconfident. And this is my heat check. This is my bring me back down to earth moment. Got 1 for 5. Went 1 for 5. Not great. Some final race thoughts before we get into listener voicemails. Charles Leclerc was absolutely dominant at the Australian Grand Prix and was only challenged once for P1 all race when Max attempted but failed to overtake him on the main straight after a safety car restart. Now, Charles Leclerc did something at the Australian Grand Prix that only 25 other Formula One drivers have done, and that is secure a Grand Slam. In F1, a Grand Slam is when you're on pole, lead every lap, get fastest lap, and win the race. Leclerc is just the 26th F1 driver to ever secure a Grand Slam in a race, and his Grand Slam is only the 64th in Formula One's long history. Quite an impressive feat from a driver who is on an absolute heater right now. Leclerc has now secured every fastest lap thus far this season. The record for most fastest laps in a season is 10. And Leclerc is already at 3 with presumably 20 Grand Prix remaining. So he actually has a great shot at breaking this record. Let's see if he can do it. This episode of the Formula BONE F1 show is brought to you in part by my favorite leg garment manufacturers, Birddogs. I wear Birddogs shorts, pants, and joggers constantly. I'm wearing the joggers right now. If you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, you can look at them. They look amazing. And the thing about the joggers is that I have to constantly fight the urge to get up from my race car bed and just jog all around the studio, okay? It's very tough to do, but I'm strong, and my Birddogs make me even stronger so I can get through it. Birddogs built-in underwear, yes, I said built-in underwear, feels better on my skin than the finest cashmere, and is also super breathable and does not bunch up like traditional underwear. You can get Birddogs shorts, pants, and joggers with or without the built-in underwear, but I highly, highly recommend that you get it with, because it feels great, and it also cuts your laundry volume down substantially, because you can just cast all your non-built-in underwear into the fiery chasm of Mordor once you start wearing Birddogs. Head to birddogs.com and get yourself the best shorts, pants, and joggers on planet Earth. And do not forget to use my code FBONE, that's FBONE, so that they throw in a free whistle tip football. It's right here in front of me. If you're watching, oh my gosh, what a great piece of foam. I think it's like two different kinds of foam. But it's incredibly high quality. It's way better than those Nerf ones that you grew up with when you play like 500 in the front yard with it. Jackpot, mystery box. You can do that all again in your life, but even better because it's with this Birddogs whistling football. I'm really bad at whistling. It's actually something I'm self-conscious about. So please comment and say, "Great whistling, J-Bone." Thank you. Go to birddogs.com right now. Load your cart up with the best shorts, pants, and joggers available on planet Earth. Plug in promo code FBONE to get that free whistling football and live happily ever after. That's birddogs.com, promo code FBONE, F-B-O-N-E. There's a link for that deal in the description of this episode. Thank you to Birddogs for supporting the Formula BONE F1 show. Next up, it's time to respond to some Australian Grand Prix themed voicemails left by Formula BONE F1 show listeners on the Bone phone. If you're new to the Formula BONE F1 show, welcome. After every race this season, I do one of these race recap podcasts, and a large part of them is me responding to some of the voicemails left by Formula BONE F1 show listeners on the Bone phone. The number for the Bone phone, by the way, is 1-833-200-0966. That's 1-833-200-0966 to hit up the Bone phone. So during or after each race, whenever you have an interesting thought, observation, hot take, complaint, or anything else like that, make sure to give the Bone phone a ring for a chance at your call being played right here on the podcast. And if you call in but don't end up having your call played, it does not mean it was a bad call. I mean, it could have been a bad call, but it doesn't mean it was a bad call. I just don't have time to get to every call every week. So just keep on calling in and you will get on eventually. Without further ado, here's the first call.
Just wanted to get your thoughts on the McLaren turnaround over the weekend. My boy from Australia, Danny Rick, finally back in the points, and Lando obviously in fifth place. It's a double points weekend for McLaren. Do you reckon that's the turning point of the season for the men in orange, or is that still some time away? Thanks, mate.
First and foremost, I am absolutely pumped that an Australian person called into the Bone phone for the Australian Grand Prix recap. Okay, that was necessary, and thank you so much to this caller for making it happen. Second, I think this race is definitely a turning point of sorts for McLaren, where they now have increased confidence in their ability to put together a respectable 2022 season. P5 and P6 is a massive, massive improvement from their P14 and 15 in Bahrain. Huge glow up from McLaren, okay? However, things are not all golden for McLaren now, so keep your walls up, McLaren fans, so that you are not massively disappointed if McLaren take a step back in the coming races. Lando has stated that he thinks 80% of their Australian Grand Prix success is because the track suited their car well, with the other 20% being hard work. McLaren boss Andreas Seidel added in that McLaren's upgrades that they brought to Albert Park helped as well, as did learning more about the car, which is where Danny Rick's time away from Bahrain testing with illness really hurt McLaren. They're kind of just getting back to having all that data that they needed now, which they would have had earlier had Danny been at Bahrain testing. It's looking like that really, really hurt them. And Andreas Seidel said as much. So things are definitely looking up for McLaren, but that does not mean that they are out of the woods yet. I think Imola will be a good test for them, as I think it kind of falls between where they've struggled at Bahrain and where they've seen decent success at Jeddah and Albert Park in terms of speed and braking. Next call.
Hey, J-Bone, it's Sam from Milwaukee. My question this week, since Leclerc got official driver of the day, are there other drivers that you thought could have been in the running for that? I personally thought Albon had a great race. Started from the back and got up to 10th and got Williams in the points. Let us know. Thanks.
Yeah, so as you all know by now, Alex Albon is my driver of the day for the 2022 Australian Grand Prix. From P20 to P10 and Williams' first points of the season. Are you kidding me? He definitely should have been the official driver of the day, but he's the driver of the day in all of our hearts. And the way that he did that crazy P20 to P10 is just as insane as going P20 to P10. He did it by going 57 laps on his starting tires and then pitting for softs with 1 lap left. If you were wondering, Albon could have finished the race on his starting tires in theory, like they were fine to finish the race on, but you're actually required by the F1 regulations to use 2 different sets of tires in a Grand Prix. So Albon had to make that pit stop with 1 lap remaining, or he actually would have been disqualified from the race. Williams elected to go with the soft tires for his final lap because they are the fastest, grippiest, and the quickest warming tires, and Williams thought they would give Albon the best chance of beating the charging Zhou Guanyu to the finish line and taking home that one precious championship point for P10, which Albon, of course, ended up doing. If only the F1 broadcast had shown us Albon's final lap. Kind of dropped the ball on that one there, folks. Classic. Side note, now that we've seen what the C2 can do you think we will see this insane tire strategy replicated again sometime this season by a midfield or bottom of the barrel team fishing for a points finish? Because I do. I do. Next call.
Hey, what's up, J-Bone? It's Fern from California. I was thinking about Mercedes' future regarding Lewis Hamilton. Now, what are they going to do after him? Who comes next? Will Nick DeVries even come back into Formula One? Who knows?
I sincerely mean this when I say that I think the driver who replaces Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes is probably somebody that none of us have ever heard of, because they're like a 12-year-old child right now who is currently in karting. Lewis strikes me as the kind of guy who will race until he's at least like 42 years old, and he's 37 right now, as long as he's still got a shot at winning. And I think as long as he's at Mercedes, he's going to have a shot at winning. And I think that Mercedes are going to keep him on as long as he wants, because he won them 6 World Drivers' Championships. So, yeah. And I, for one, welcome many more years of Lewis in F1, because he's just great for the sport. This episode of the Formula Bone F1 show is brought to you in part by Felix Gray Glasses. The good folks at Felix Gray create effective, research-backed products to improve humans' relationships with technology. It all started 5 years ago when Felix Gray set out to create eyewear that would make it easier and more comfortable for humans to stare at screens. Because whether you like it or not, we all live in a digital world now, and that means we are forced to look at screens, and more screens all day, every day. You might even be watching me on a screen right now. For all I know. I mean, many people are. I'm on YouTube. And the thing about all these screens is that they are wreaking havoc on our eyeballs and brains and causing things like eye strain, headaches, and blurry vision. The blue light emitted from these screens is the culprit, and Felix Gray's clear blue light lenses filter 15 times more blue light than other clear lenses. 9 out of 10 customers experience relief from eye strain, headaches, and or blurry vision. And Felix Gray Glasses don't just do a great job protecting your eyes and brain from the evil of screens. They're also incredibly high quality and built to last. I'm wearing them right now, and I cannot tell you, these are the most high quality glasses I've ever owned. Felix Gray Glasses, again, they're incredibly high quality, built to last. The frames are lightweight and durable organic acetate and are hand finished in Italy. And the lenses are double-sided, anti-reflective, scratch resistant, and have the blue light filtration infused within the lens material itself. Felix Gray has both non-prescription and prescription lenses available for those of you who may already have prescription glasses but are ready for an upgrade to Felix Gray. Check out Felix Gray's full selection at felixgrayglasses.com/FBONE, that's FBONE, where you'll have access to free shipping, returns, and exchanges for a completely risk-free shopping experience. That's FELIXGRAY glasses.com/FBONE. There's a link for that deal in the description of this episode. Thank you to Felix Gray Glasses for supporting the Formula Bone F1 show. Time for some more voicemails.
Hey, J-Bone. This is Clark calling out of Oklahoma. I was wondering what you thought of Aston Martin right now after that dumpster fire of a weekend.
Dumpster fire of a weekend might be an understatement. Okay, one of the worst team weekends that I've ever seen in F1. You have Sebastian Vettel's awful weekend that I spoke about earlier, and you also have Stroll's slightly less awful, but still awful weekend that saw him get in 2 crashes and finish outside the points. Stroll's second crash, which involved none other than Nicholas the GOAT Latifi, and was truly bizarre, occurred in Q1, which his car was just fixed in time for after an earlier crash in FP3. The crash with Latifi was ruled to be Stroll's fault. Now, I thought it was Latifi's fault originally because he let Stroll by and then was attempting to immediately unlap himself when he got hit. But I guess the stewards blamed Stroll for not checking his mirrors more than Latifi for doing something bizarre by unlapping himself immediately after getting past. The crash with Latifi resulted in Stroll getting handed a ceremonial grid place penalty that put him in P19 ahead of Alex Albon, my driver of the day, which, of course, is where Lance Stroll would have ended up anyways, considering he didn't set a Q1 time. Aston Martin's weekend was so bad that even the Aston Martin safety car took a big fat L at the Australian Grand Prix, with Max blaming it for not going fast enough to keep tire temperatures up. Max actually referred to the Aston Martin safety car as a turtle, which is a hilariously good insult considering it is both slow and green. I'd say it is only going to get better from here, Aston Martin fans, but I'm just not sure that it is. Time for some shout-outs. Shout out to Formula Bone listener James from Singapore, who attended the Australian Grand Prix and sent me an awesome synopsis of his experience. Shout out to new Formula Bone listener JT for watching his first ever live F1 race. Let's go. Welcome. Shout out to everyone who has bought Formula Bone merch thus far. Y'all are the real ones. Get yours now at bolenmedia.com/shop. And shout out, as always, to everyone in the Formula Bone Discord, which you can join via the invite link in the description of this episode. DM me if you want to be shouted out here in the shout out section in the future. Before I get going, though, I'd like to run you through the links that I've placed in the description of this episode. You can join the 200-plus member Formula Bone Discord server with the invite link that I've placed in the description of this episode. You can help support the Formula Bone F1 show financially by buying Formula Bone merch at bolenmedia.com/shop. You can support the show financially in an even greater capacity by supporting today's sponsors. Shop Birddogs at birddogs.com with promo code FBONE, FBONE, for a free whistle tip football with your order of the best shorts, pants, and joggers on the planet. And shop Felix Gray Glasses risk-free with free shipping, returns, and exchanges at felixgrayglasses.com/FBONE. That's FBONE. And again, every link I just mentioned can be found in the description of this episode. You can follow me, J-Bone, everywhere on social media at Jared Borislow. That's JaredBorislow. And now, if you're all caught up on the Formula Bone F1 show after listening to this podcast, but you want to keep hearing my voice, I co-host a comedy podcast called the Ross Bolen Podcast, where we share a ton of laughs covering a wide variety of topics, including current events, non-F1 sports, music, food, funny news stories, and more, while also diving into some mental health discussion as well. If you like this podcast, I promise you'll love the Ross Bolen Podcast, which you can check out wherever you're checking out this podcast right now. That's ROSSBOLEN, the Ross Bolen Podcast. It is time for the NPR-style sign-off. The Formula Bone F1 show is recorded in Austin, Texas, and brought to you by Bolen Media. It's hosted by me, Jared J-Bone Borislow, and I also produce the show because I'm a content machine. Kate Orez, Michael Heim, and I make all the podcast clips that you see on social media at Formula Bone. Our iconic theme music and live stream music is by 7 to Midnight. You can follow him on social media at the number 7 TO Midnight. You can follow the show on social media by following at Formula Bone everywhere. You can watch the show on YouTube by searching Formula Bone. And you can help the show gain new listeners by rating and reviewing the Formula Bone F1 show on Apple Podcasts and by rating it on Spotify. Until next time, J-Bone!